May 11, 1996, at approximately 14:14 Eastern Daylight Time, Flight 592 crashed in the Florida Everglades about 11 minutes after departure from the Miami International Airport. The regularly scheduled flight had departed Miami in visual meteorological conditions. Approximately 6 minutes after departure, the first officer contacted the air traffic controller and requested an immediate return to Miami International Airport because of smoke in the airplane.
592 needs an immediate return to Miami. What kind of problem are you having? Smoke in the cabin.
It was a fast-moving fire that was catastrophic.
Yes, I am fishing at Everglades Holiday Park, and a large jet aircraft has just crashed out here. I heard the impact, and I saw dirt and mud flying in the air. The plane was sideways. See any smoke, but I saw a tremendous cloud of mud and dirt go into the sky when it hit.
Los Angeles, an airliner has crashed into the Florida Everglades.
Very few of the parts of the plane are visible.
We've reached a point where the FAA is truly a broken down bureaucracy and cannot be repaired as it is.
Launched in 1992 by a cadre of seasoned airline executives including Robert Priddy, Maury Gallagher, and Tim Flynn, ValuJet Airlines began operations in October 1993 with a single DC-9 and a bold promise: make air travel affordable for all. Based in Atlanta, the airline targeted cost-conscious travelers, offering no-frills flights across the Southeast and Midwest United States. The business model was as lean as it was aggressive. Pilots paid for their own training, flight attendants received minimal instruction, and nearly every operational component, from maintenance to personnel hiring, was outsourced to third parties. ValuJet's inaugural flight from Atlanta to Tampa soon gave way to a sprawling network that reached 22 US cities and even one in Canada. The airline went public just 8 months after its first flight, turning a $21 million profit in 1994. But behind that rapid expansion were practices that would eventually draw federal scrutiny. Due to the cost-cutting efforts and the outsources of maintenance, the airline did not own hangars or stock spare parts for their own aircraft. Any delays caused by mechanical issues could result in mechanic pay cuts, an incentive system that encouraged haste over caution. The fleet was emblematic of the airline's ethos: cheap but functional. At its peak, ValuJet operated 98 aircraft, mostly McDonnell Douglas DC-9s, many of them over 2 decades old, with maintenance histories that read like a patchwork quilt. Most were acquired secondhand, decades after their first flight, then repainted in white with blue and yellow trim. Then, to finish off their elegant look, each aircraft was adorned with the airline's signature Critter logo. By 1996, the average age of its planes was 27 years old, the oldest of any US carrier. Flight 592 was assigned a DC-9 that had begun its life with Delta Airlines in 1969. After 23 years in Delta's service, the aircraft was sold back to McDonnell Douglas and then to ValuJet in 1993. At the time of the crash, the plane had accumulated more than 68,000 flight hours and over 80,000 flight cycles. Both Pratt & Whitney engines had logged tens of thousands of hours and thousands of cycles each. In the years leading up to Flight 592, the aircraft had experienced a troubling number of incidents: 2 aborted takeoffs, 8 emergency landings, and chronic mechanical issues, including faulty pressurization and engine problems. Despite its budget-friendly image, ValuJet's reputation was faltering by the mid-1990s. Passengers praised the fares, but delays and in-flight emergencies painted a more turbulent picture. Inside the industry, concerns about the airline were mounting. Pilots and mechanics raised red flags about shoddy repairs and inadequate oversight. The Department of Defense rejected ValuJet for troop transport in 1995, citing severe quality control issues. A 1996 FAA internal memo even recommended the airline be recertified, a bureaucratic step toward grounding. Between 1994 and early 1996, ValuJet aircraft logged 129 emergency landings. Its accident rate was over 14 times that of major US carriers. Still, the airline continued to grow, even placing a high-profile order for 50 brand-new MD-95 jets with options for 50 more. But for all the airline's ambition, its foundation was deeply flawed, a structure built not on safety or reliability, but on speed, savings, and risk. And by the time Flight 592 left the runway on May 11, 1996, that risk had already been realized far too many times. Miami International Airport, today a bustling hub, was born in 1928 as Pan American Field, the brainchild of Pan American Airways. The first of its kind in the continental US to offer international customs services, it began by linking Miami to Havana via airmail. Its Art Deco terminal, designed by Delano and Aldrich, quickly became a symbol of modern air travel. Celebrities like Amelia Earhart gathered to christen what they saw as the launch pad for a new era. In the 1930s and 40s, the airport expanded when Eastern Airlines and National Airlines made it their base, while nearby, the Intercontinental Corporation built aircraft under government contracts. As war consumed everything, the site evolved into the Miami Army Airfield, a hive of military logistics. Bomber patrols hunted U-boats off the Atlantic, while Pan American ferried Lend-Lease aircraft bound for British, Russian, and Chinese forces. Freight depots repacked bulky cargo to squeeze every ounce of efficiency from the war effort. By war's end, the airfield was a vital spoke in a vast wheel of global transport. Post-war, the airport returned to civilian life, but with a widened ambition. Dade County acquired the property, absorbing Pan Am's holdings and transforming the complex into Miami International Airport. Its formal rededication in 1950 marked the beginning of its rise to global prominence. By the 1960s, it was the largest central terminal in the world, complete with jetways and a 270-room hotel. Concorde's once graced its runways, and astronaut Frank Borman even relocated Eastern Airlines headquarters there. By the late 20th century, the airport was both a monument to and the engine of the city of Miami's explosive growth. Just west of the airport lies a world older than civilization, the Florida Everglades. This vast, slow-moving river of grass stretches from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay, its sawgrass prairies and mangrove forests teeming with life. The Miccosukee and Seminole peoples long adapted to its unforgiving environment, resisting the removal efforts of the United States by making the wetlands their fortress and home. Long before it became a national park, the Everglades was eyed for exploitation. Drainage schemes began in the 19th century and escalated after 1900, slicing the ecosystem with canals and levees. By mid-century, sugarcane fields replaced wetlands, and urban Miami devoured the eastern edge. Yet the tide turned in 1947, the same year the park was dedicated, thanks in part to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's book, The Everglades, River of Grass, which reshaped public understanding of this ecosystem, not as a swamp, but a flowing, fragile river. It was into this landscape that Eastern Airlines Flight 401 descended on a moonlit December night in 1972. The Lockheed TriStar was moments from landing at Miami when a faulty landing gear indicator diverted the crew's attention. Unaware the autopilot had disengaged, the aircraft drifted lower till it slammed into the Everglades. More than 100 lives were lost, and the survivors faced a nightmare of tangled brush, black water, and invisible dangers. The recovery that followed was arduous. First responders waded chest-deep through muck, fighting time and terrain. The crash of Flight 401 marked not only the first fatal accident involving a wide-body aircraft, but also a grim foreshadowing of the challenges that would return decades later, when another jet vanished into the same unforgiving wilderness. The trouble began long before Flight 592 ever left the ground. As mentioned earlier, ValuJet had been cutting costs by outsourcing critical maintenance. One of its key contractors was SaberTech, a Miami-based firm tasked with removing expired chemical oxygen generators from several MD-80 aircraft. These small devices, intended to release breathable oxygen during emergencies, became highly dangerous when their shelf life ended. If not properly handled, they could ignite, reaching internal temperatures over 260 degrees Celsius. ValuJet issued explicit work orders for 2 other aircraft, instructing SaberTech to remove and replace all cabin oxygen generators. Company procedures and the MD-80 maintenance manual required any unspent generator to have a safety or shipping cap installed over the firing pin, and once removed, they were to be expended or stored under strict conditions. But execution fell drastically short of policy. SaberTech mechanics removed approximately 144 generators across the 2 planes. Most were outdated, yet no consistent record was kept, and nearly all units were left unexpended, a direct violation of federal safety guidance. Some mechanics were aware of the cap requirement but said none were available. Others simply assumed someone else would handle it. When the mechanics ran out of green repairable tags, which typically flagged parts for reuse or evaluation, they substituted with white removed tags, adding to the confusion. In the end, dozens of volatile canisters were casually boxed in reused packaging, without any insulation, cushioning, or hazard labeling. The boxes, 5 in total, were shuffled from the maintenance hangar to a shipping area, where SaberTech's stock clerk, unaware of the contents, labeled them as oxycanisters empty. This was not malice, but it was ignorance, born from a complete breakdown of communication and oversight. The mechanic who delivered the boxes never explained what was inside. No one confirmed the status of the canisters. And with no written protocol in place to flag hazardous material, they were treated like routine inventory.
The mechanic says, that airplane's good to go. That airplane's a green airplane. I'm going to rely upon that.
On May 11, 1996, the same day as the crash, a Sabertech driver delivered the boxes along with 3 aircraft tires to the ValuJet ramp. There, ramp agents unknowingly stacked the unstable generators atop tires in the forward cargo hold of Flight 592, unsecured and unmarked. One agent even recalled hearing a clink and feeling the boxes shift, an omen unrecognized. ValuJet Flight 592 was scheduled to depart Miami International Airport at 1 p.m. on May 11, 1996. At the controls, Captain Candelin Candy Kubek, 35, and First Officer Richard Hazen, 52. Kubek was one of ValuJet's most experienced pilots, with over 8,900 flight hours, more than 2,100 of those in DC-9s. She held multiple pilot and instructor certificates and had undergone hands-on fire and hazardous materials training. Hazen, her co-pilot, was a seasoned aviator and certified mechanic with more than 6,400 hours in the air, including extensive DC-9 experience and a long tenure as a military and civilian flight engineer. Both had recently flown together on Flight 591 from Atlanta to Miami earlier that same day. Their cabin crew included 3 flight attendants, 2 of them just 22 years old, recently hired, and 1 aged 36. While trained, none had yet completed annual recurrent safety instruction. Their inexperience would be tested in ways no drill could simulate. Flight 592 carried 105 passengers, many bound for Atlanta on weekend trips. Among them, a 4-year-old child flying alone, 5 co-workers from a Miami firm, and a caregiver, Sabine Cincy, who'd recently been profiled in a local newspaper for her work with the elderly. On board too were musician Walter Hyatt, NFL player Rodney Culver, and Delmarie Walker, a murder suspect from Georgia. The aircraft, a McDonnell Douglas DC-932, was running late due to a previous maintenance delay. During turnaround, workers loaded the forward cargo hold with several tires and 5 cardboard boxes, mislabeled as empty, but filled with the 144 expired chemical oxygen generators. Neither the ramp crew nor the pilots were fully aware of the lethal nature of the cargo. Flight 592 pushed back from Gate G2 shortly before 1:40 p.m. and began taxiing to runway 9L. At 2:04 p.m., it lifted off under the clear Florida sky and climbed past 10,000 feet. For 6 brief minutes, all was normal. At 2:10 p.m., passengers began smelling smoke. A loud bang echoed in the cockpit, possibly a tire exploding from the heat building below. Electrical power sagged. Inside the cargo hold, the improperly secured oxygen generators had ignited. Fire spread rapidly, consuming wiring and insulation. The flight attendant burst into the cockpit shouting about fire in the cabin. Shouts of "Fire! Fire!" from the cabin were picked up on the cockpit voice recorder. Despite protocol to keep the cockpit sealed in such events, the intercom had failed, leaving no other way to alert the pilots. The aircraft's data recorder captured a cascade of system failures. The autopilot began malfunctioning, control surfaces became erratic, and vital instruments flickered out. At 2:10 p.m., Kubek radioed, "We need to go back to Miami." Moments later, the CVR recorded, "We're on fire, smoke in the cabin." The controller cleared them for an emergency return and offered vectors to the nearest runway, but the fire was now degrading the aircraft's structural integrity and control systems. One flight attendant could be heard yelling, "Completely on fire!"
It was a fast-moving fire that was catastrophic. It destroyed the electrical system and the flight control system.
By 2:12 p.m., the aircraft began an uncontrolled turn southward. A TC tried repeatedly to reach them. The last radio transmission came at 2:11. Then, silence. At 2:13, Flight 592 vanished from radar. Witnesses on the ground and in nearby planes saw the DC-9 in a steep right bank, then a near vertical nosedive. One described it as disappearing into the Everglades with barely a trace. Another recalled the sky erupting with a massive fireball and a rising column of smoke. The aircraft impacted swamp terrain at over 500 miles per hour. It disintegrated on contact.
That aircraft was almost double that. One wing pointed at the ground, one wing pointed into the sky. It flew over the canal I was fishing in and then sharply dove into the ground from an altitude of about 400 feet. It simply kind of made one great big thud into the ground and literally made the ground, the water, and my boat shake.
Rescue crews rushed to the site, accessible only by airboat and helicopter, where they faced snakes, waist-high water, and unforgiving terrain. What they found was a scar in the wetlands, paper, metal shards, fragments of bone, no survivors. Most of the bodies were never fully recovered. Captain Kubek's remains were never identified. Hazen was identified by a single piece of tissue. For others, it came down to dental fragments, a tooth, or a piece of clothing.
Very few of the parts of the plane are visible. We don't know precisely where the major parts of the aircraft are.
The crash of ValuJet Flight 592 claimed all 110 souls on board. The Everglades became their grave, the smoke their final epitaph.
The water we've been finding is a minimum 3 to 5 feet deep, and the muck, I've been told by local residents in some areas, can be as far as 30 to 40 feet deep. The visibility of the divers has been almost nil. The water is very thick with silt. It's very murky. They're not basically able to see, I think one of them told me that he was not able to see more than an inch or two in front of his face. The search is basically conducted by hand.
Recovery was brutal. The Everglades swallowed nearly everything. Teams of divers walked shoulder to shoulder through the murky swamp, guided by sonar, swarmed by insects, and shadowed by sharpshooters scanning for alligators and snakes. What they found was devastation.
Well, the tough things were some of the items. Found a teddy bear and things like that. And that made it tough.
We lost 4 of our searchers because the minute they saw that teddy bear sitting out there in the crash site, they just, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore.
The aircraft had hit the muck nose first at over 500 miles per hour, shattering into unrecognizable debris. Human remains, no larger than a knee, were sealed in bags. No intact bodies, no survivors, only fragments. Among the wreckage, a worker stepped on something hard, a flight data recorder, bent but intact. It was flown, still wet, to NTSB headquarters to prevent the tape from drying and warping. But it recorded only 11 flight parameters, not enough to tell the whole story. The cockpit voice recorder, which held the final 30 minutes of cockpit conversation, remained buried, unrecovered. Investigators were left with silence and a puzzle sealed in mud and misery. Still, the National Transportation Safety Board pressed forward. The cargo manifest led them to a chilling discovery: the boxes of expired chemical oxygen generators, marked as empty, stowed in the forward cargo hold. Investigators determined that 1 or more of these generators had likely been jostled during taxiing and ignited. The reaction produced not only oxygen, but intense heat, up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire it sparked raged beneath the cabin floor, fed by the oxygen itself, and made worse by aircraft tires and wheels also stored in the hold.
This is an oxygen canister similar to the ones being called into question. In fact, some of the evidence gathered here so far is being sent to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the people there are going to try to determine if the evidence may show some signs that an explosion occurred on the crash.
The DC-9's Class D cargo compartment, designed to starve fires of air, was no match. There were no smoke detectors, no fire suppression system. The pilots didn't even know they were burning until it was far too late. The final NTSB report was a scathing indictment of systemic failure. It blamed 3 parties: SaberTech for improperly preparing and packaging the hazardous materials, ValuJet for failing to supervise its contractor and enforce its own safety policies, and the FAA for neglecting to mandate basic fire detection systems in cargo holds despite years of warnings. It also concluded that the fire likely destroyed control cables, explaining the aircraft's loss of control. The crew may have remained conscious through much of the descent, unable to see or breathe as their instruments failed one by one.
The final report from the NTSB will reach a final conclusion on the cause of the Florida Everglades crash, but it does not bring closure to the deep feelings of loss my family and I feel each and every day, especially since the remains of my sister, Marla Cuevas-Belandrin, were never recovered. Our hope is that the FAA and the NTSB have learned through this tragic disaster what they need to do to prevent another air disaster.
In the aftermath of Flight 592, the Federal Aviation Administration banned chemical oxygen generators from all passenger flights and issued a mandate requiring all Class D cargo compartments to be retrofitted with smoke detectors and fire suppression systems by 2001. It was a reform that had been recommended nearly a decade earlier, but never acted upon until tragedy made it unavoidable. Lawsuits followed swiftly. The families of the victims filed dozens of civil cases against both ValuJet and SaberTech. SaberTech became the first U.S. aviation firm to face criminal prosecution for its role in a crash.
My son died because of greed, unbelievable, uncaring of all those people, from the Secretary of Transportation to the men who put the canister on that plane. They never thought about the lives of the people that they would hurt. I have lived with this for 1 year. Mother's Day to me will never be the same again.
In 1999, the company was convicted on charges of mishandling hazardous materials and failing to properly train employees. Though the majority of the more serious convictions were later overturned on appeal, the precedent had already been set. One Sabertech mechanic was convicted, another acquitted, and a third, Mauro Ociel Valenzuela Reyes, fled before trial and remains a fugitive. The company itself folded in 1999. ValuJet, though never criminally prosecuted, did not escape the storm. Its record was damning. Aircraft allowed to fly with leaking hydraulics, faulty radar, and unchecked engine corrosion. FAA internal memos questioned whether the airline should have been allowed to operate at all. Just weeks after the crash, the FAA grounded the carrier. It returned to the skies later that year, but the damage was done.
David Hinson, who will make a brief statement on ValuJet and respond to a few questions.
The agency's 30-day intensive inspection found several serious deficiencies in ValuJet operations, including the airline's failure to establish the airworthiness of some of its aircraft, system-wide deficiencies in ValuJet's maintenance program, multiple shortcomings in the quality assurance of ValuJet contractors, and a lack of engineering capability in their maintenance support organization. Following some 2,000 inspections, the airline has not demonstrated that it has an effective maintenance control system. Therefore, the airline has agreed to halt voluntarily its operations until such time as it demonstrates appropriate corrective action. ValuJet has agreed to cease passenger operations voluntarily at midnight tonight, Eastern Daylight Time.
In 1997, ValuJet merged with AirTran and quietly disappeared. The new airline kept its distance from its past, down to sealing away memorabilia in a warehouse and foregoing public acknowledgement of the crash's anniversaries. The wider industry took note. The FAA tightened scrutiny on low-cost carriers and outsourced maintenance operations. Airlines re-examined their procedures, and the culture of regulatory leniency that had defined the deregulation era came under sharp criticism. ValuJet's story became a cautionary tale, a case study in how cost-cutting, when left unchecked, can gut the very systems meant to keep passengers safe. Flight 592 didn't just claim 110 lives, it exposed the fragility of an entire system. In the years that followed, safety came at a higher premium, and while names changed and fleets modernized, the echoes of that disaster linger in every fire sensor, every updated cargo hold, and every family that still waits for accountability. If you found this story interesting and want to explore other historical people, places, and events, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with topics you'd like us to feature in future episodes. I'm working to build a community around these videos, and your thoughts on potential topics or ways to improve the channel are more than welcome. Your support makes this channel possible, and I'm excited to keep sharing these incredible stories with you.